village, and the girls are well settled both at school and within the wider community. The planning development will ensure that they can continue to grow in a stable and familiar setting, avoiding the upheaval of moving away from the area they know and love. I strongly support this application and urge the Planning Committee consider the significant benefits it will bring, not only to the Giles family, but also to our local community. Thank you for considering this letter in support of their application.
Thank you very much. Well timed, just under 3 minutes. If there are any questions about that statement that's been read out, it's quite unreasonable to expect Ms. Hoare to answer them, but the agent is here. So if there are any questions, although I think it basically spoke for itself. So happy to move on from that. Okay, we're just going to pause for 2 minutes whilst... Just going to pause for a couple of minutes. Whilst we're waiting for to resume, I invite Mr. Crozier to come up to the microphone, who's our next registered speaker. I assume we're still live streaming. Okay, so our next registered speaker in support of the application is Councillor Peter Crozier of Beeralston Parish Council. As you well know, you have 3 minutes, and we're timing you. Off you go.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I want to put a bit of history and context into this. We've had a bit already from the applicant. These houses were designed in 1944, according to parish records, to replace houses that bombed out in the Second World War in Plymouth. The nature of the houses in those days were a lot smaller than what the standards are today. We've heard the 64 metres, today's standard would be 79. So if it was on a modern building and they were having an extension, it would be only 2/3 of the size. So I just want to make that clear. The houses were ex-council houses, this borough's council houses, and a number of them have been sold down that road. And it's easy to determine which ones have been sold and which ones are still owned by Live West. And quite a number of them are still owned by Live West, hence the lack of modernisation to a lot of those homes. As I say, the ones that have been have generally taken out the front hedge and they're parking the cars off in their front gardens. But as we said, this is small to start with. The applicants are expecting their third child about May time next year. They are well set in school. They're fully involved in the village with the local church and other activities. Mr. Giles, he's a member of the snooker club, and they also have an allotment in the village. The proposed extension has been thoughtfully designed and its visual appeal to enhance the visual appeal of the street. You know, it mimics the rest of the houses in that street, which I'm sure you will agree. The proposal represents a sensitive approach to addressing the needs of a growing family while respecting and improving the local environment. I move on. Section 135 was mentioned just now. To be quite honest, you know, we're thinking we're dealing with state secrets or something. Is it going to actually create much harm in this road by having an extension which mimics the design? The next door neighbour may wish to do the same. And there's very few houses down that road that actually have the width to put an extension on. So, you know, I challenge you on that. What we're dealing with, dare I say, is semantics. You know, and there's always nuances within these semantics. And I think it's vital that we help this family achieve their aim in enlarging that house, to stay in the village. It's an economic thing to have an affordable home. They're a very valuable thing these days. Thank you. And I will just say, I sincerely hope councillors here will look favourably on this application and support this project. Questions?
Thank you. Members of the committee, have you any questions for Councillor Crozier? Nope. Thank you very much. Now on my sheet it's got Councillor Angela Blackman speaking on behalf of the ward, but she's not here, so she's not appearing online. No. Okay, so we'll assume she's elsewhere. So that's all the registered speakers. We now are in discussion. We've had a chance to question the case officer and the registered speakers. So would anyone like to say anything before we go to the vote? Councillor Jury.
Thank you. I wonder whether I could just check something with the planning officers that are present. And certainly reading paragraph 135 of the NPPF and reading Dev 20, I completely see the points that are being made in terms of the comments that are made in those in those bits of advice and guidance. Would it be your view that that guidance is more qualitative rather than quantitative in terms of its interpretation? So we're looking at the massing, for example. It's our view as to whether that massing has an effect or not. I mean, it was interesting, I think you mentioned that perhaps a smaller extension would be more favourably received, but I'm just really trying to get a point. It's more a question of interpretation rather than something being deemed to be outside of any particular guidelines. Would that be correct?
It's officer understanding that it's largely qualitative, so we don't have fixed numbers in Dev 20, so we don't have fixed sizes, and it's a value judgment on balance on each case. So we take each case on its merits, related to the specific proposal site and the existing dwelling on the site, and we make a judgment from there. There's no hard and fast rules.
Yes, Senior Planner would like to word.
I just wanted to add to that. Obviously, Dev 20 is very much about how any development fits in its context, and that's specifically why, when you went on the site visit, the case officer took you along the street to see the symmetry along the street. And I don't, I think had the extension been somewhat smaller, I don't think we'd be sat here today. Thank you.
Any other comments? Please do, yeah.
Describe it as that. Sadly, I wasn't able to make the site visit, so I'd also be interested in the views of those that were able to make the site visit. And perhaps just say, in this context, and I completely appreciate the point of the run of houses and their symmetry, where this building is situated at the end of that run and adjacent to some larger buildings, but also having an area of garden that seems to me, looking at the plans, to be large enough to accommodate this extension. Would anyone who was present be able to give any sort of view as to their consideration as to whether that makes the positioning of this building makes a difference in the context of the village as a whole? If that makes sense.
Well, just before, I'll come to you in a second, if I may. I was on the site visit, so perhaps it would be useful for me to give you my thoughts. The street in question has, in a sense, 2 rows of these pretty much identical houses, all the way up one side and all the way down the other side, and this is one of them. So from a sort of symmetry point of view, the pattern is clearly established, and as far as I could see walking up the street, there were no other extensions to the sides of the properties. Some had porches, and some of the porches were of a different style to some of the other porches. You can see on some of the photographs there. But pretty much all the houses were out of a mould, as it were, up and down the street, with the exception of the one that the planning officer mentioned, which is at the very bottom of the street and sort of slightly around the corner, which doesn't look anything like these houses. It's completely different. I mean, it probably started looking out like these houses, but has now completely changed and is entirely rendered and is considerably bigger than these ones. So from my point of view, the argument really comes down to protecting, if you like, the landscape, if I can put it that way, on one side, and allowing the amenity of accommodation on the other. I mean, that's the balance in my mind that I'm weighing up. I think it says in the report somewhere that had the extension been slightly smaller and at the back of the house rather than the front, we wouldn't be here probably today. But it is, as you can see from the plans, were it to be built, a very visible extension to the symmetry of the house. I don't know if that helps, but that's my opinion. Councillor Guthrie.
You've mainly answered what I was going to talk about, other than to answer Councillor Jury that I think the garden does support that extension. It is quite a substantial garden. So on that point, I think you could say that it would be a fair size for the garden. I think the biggest question for me is the fact that if we're normally looking at having enough homes that are affordable and of a smaller size in many places. So you could argue that this makes another bigger property that may not be so required, but what I'm struggling with mostly is that you've got people well embedded in the village. If they were to move to try and buy a bigger house, I think that would be more difficult and financially onerous on them. So I think balancing that against the symmetry of the street is the main question for me. The best news for them, I think, is that they're on the end of that row. So in some ways it has a lesser impact than if it was right in the middle of all the other symmetry going either side. So.
Any other points of discussion before we move to a vote? Now the officer's recommendation is refusal, just to make sure everyone understands what we're voting for. So those in favour of supporting the officer's recommendation.
Sorry, Chairman, is that a formal are you proposing refusal?
The officer's recommendation is refusal.
Sorry, I thought you were saying before we go to the vote. Are you making a proposal, or are you seeking a proposal from the floor?
So the officer's recommendation is for refusal. So I'll make the proposal that we refuse this application. But I want to be clear that people understand what they're voting on. So if you vote in support of the officer's recommendation, you are voting for refusal. Everyone clear on that? Yeah. Okay, those in favour of support.
Sorry, hang on a second.
Is there a seconder for the proposal?
Sorry, seconder for that? The proposal?
I'm not prepared to do that. I'm not prepared to second that one.
You're not prepared. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Mott, thank you. Right, so we now go to the vote, and the vote, those in favour of supporting the officer's recommendation for refusal, please show.